on tyranny. Lesson 4, take responsibility for the face of the world. The symbols of today enable the reality of tomorrow. Notice the swastikas and the other signs of hate. Do not look away and do not get used to them. Remove them yourself and set an example for others to do so. And to just set the stage here a little bit, this was one that made me think a little bit and was just, think about what it would do to you if you came across someone you saw scrubbing off swastikas, removing that imagery, taking the responsibility upon themselves to get rid of that and to make it clear to others that it won't be tolerated. Just think about what that would do to you. And I think that serves as a great example of exactly why when you come across something like that, even though it's easy to brush off the responsibility and say, that's someone's job is to remove stuff like this, it goes a long way when you do it yourself. And so he says, life is political, not because the world cares about how you feel, but because the world reacts to what you do. The minor choices we make are themselves a kind of vote, making it more or less likely that free and fair elections will be held in the future. In the politics of the everyday, our words and gestures, or their absence, count very much. A few extreme and less extreme examples from the 20th century can show us how. And so he goes on to provide this example that in the Soviet Union under Stalin, prosperous farmers were portrayed on propaganda posters as pigs, a dehumanization that in a rural setting clearly suggests slaughter. This was in the early 1930s as the Soviet state tried to master the countryside and extract capital for crash industrialization. A neighbor portrayed as a pig is someone whose land you can take, but those who followed the symbolic logic became victims in their turn. And then he goes on to provide some other examples, but he ultimately ends up saying, you might one day be offered the opportunity to display symbols of loyalty. Make sure that such symbols include your fellow citizens rather than exclude them. Even the history of lapel pins is far from innocent. In Nazi Germany in 1933, people wore lapel pins that said yes during the elections and referendum that confirmed the one-party state. In Austria in 1938, people who had not previously been Nazis began to wear swastika pins. What might seem like a gesture of pride can be a source of exclusion. In the Europe of the 1930s and 40s, some people chose to wear swastikas, and then others had to wear yellow stars. And then I felt like the last example here was a pretty powerful example of the type of everyday situations that I think this book does a good job of addressing, these everyday, seemingly mundane, or even if you recognize the importance in that moment, there are moments that are easy to do nothing. But that's exactly why you should do something. And so in the late history of communism, when no one believed in the revolution anymore, that offers a fine lesson about symbols. Even when citizens are demoralized and wish only to be left alone, public markers can still sustain a tyrannical regime. When Czechoslovak communists won elections in 1946 and then proceeded to claim full power after a coup in 1948, many Czechoslovak citizens were euphoric. When the dissident thinker Václav Havel wrote The Power of the Powerless 3 decades later in 1978, He was explaining the continuity of an oppressive regime in whose goals and ideology few people still believed. He offered a parable of a greengrocer who places a sign reading, "Workers of the world, unite," in his shop window. And so this is the example. It's not that the man actually endorses the content of this quotation from the Communist Manifesto. He places the sign in his window so that he can withdraw into daily life without trouble from the authorities. When everyone else follows the same logic, the public sphere is covered with signs of loyalty, and resistance becomes unthinkable. As Havel put it, we have seen that the real meaning of the greengrocer's slogan has nothing to do with what the text of the slogan actually says. Even so, the real meaning is quite clear and generally comprehensible because the code is so familiar. The greengrocer declares his loyalty in the only way the regime is capable of hearing, that is, by accepting the prescribed ritual, by accepting appearances as reality, by accepting the given rules of the game, thus making it possible for the game to go on, for it to exist in the first place. And what happens, asks Havel, if no one plays the game? This is a challenge that I would have to face, right? Because I run into situations where, it's just not worth the hassle, right? And you think, I can resist in other ways, but I will comply here because the hassle is not worth it. There's, the support system isn't there, or whatever it might be. And so you go along with it in that way. All that does is, on the one hand, people who want to resist, right? It creates a disconnect. It creates a lack of conversation among the people. Let's say nobody actually believes in this thing. Nobody supports it. But if everybody has the sign up, you don't know who really feels that way. And the risk reward there is so bad in when there's governments like this, because if you say the wrong thing to the wrong person, it can end very badly. And so, if all of these people have the shop sign up, you're assuming that they support it. You would never have reason to suspect otherwise. And so that's just a way, like, even when in country, nobody's really buying into this thing, that's a way for it to persist. So between the everyday symbols that are hateful and you can take the responsibility to remove, do that. But there might also be times where this more subtle occurrence, where either resistance seems futile or you're just going along with it to not be hassled, those are equally important to stand up against.